Hello everyone, welcome back. If you've been to my channel before, you would see that last week I did a little video showcasing my 4x6 O-gauge layout that I have set up in my apartment that I use to, again, get my Lionel trains off the floor and onto something that looks like a toy train layout. So what I wanted to do for this video was to go through what I have in my post-war collection. It's not the greatest collection, nor does it have many engines that are really the most desirable or collector value, but to me that's not the point. I'm really just happy to own some of these trains and be able to run them. You know, I've been in love with the post-war era for Lionel ever since I was a little kid, and just to actually be able to own some of these engines, you know, just makes me happy, even though I still would like to get more, particularly the 2245 Texas Special and the 2240 Wabash F3s. I hope to get those in my collection someday. So what we're going to do for this video is go through each individual locomotive that I have from the post-war era with a couple little extras here thrown in there. So I'll go through each engine individually, kind of just look at imperfections, where I got it from, how long I've had it, and then after that I will take each engine around the layout a few loops, and with each engine pulling a different freight consist, so you can also get a glimpse at some of the rolling stock I own. So to kick things off, we're going to start with what is simultaneously both the newest addition to the collection and the oldest Lionel engine I own. And that is the 2333 New York Central F3 from 1949. I picked these up over my vacation back in May when I was in Pennsylvania and Maryland. And while I was at Strasburg, I went to the Crackerberry Farm Antique Mall just down the street from the Strasburg Railroad. And they had this big display case, like as soon as you walk in the front door, it's just top to bottom with post-war Lionel. And I almost walked out of there with a complete general set with the 1862 440, the horse car and the passenger cars. And I almost walked out with that. However, upon further inspection of the engine, the smokestack was broken in half. Some of the cars were missing their steps, and horses were kind of broken. So I sadly had to pass up on that and went with these 2333s, which to me was still a good deal because, I love the F3s. To me, they are the kings of the post-war era. And as you can see by the dummy unit here in the front, it's missing one of the portholes. They all have both engines do have their portholes, but I just keep them off because they just will not stay on the body unless I get around to super gluing them. And they are both missing one handrail on the front of the nose, but to me that's fine so long as the powered unit here is in good mechanical working order, and it is. It is a very smooth running locomotive. Even with it being from 1949, it predates the introduction of magnet traction by 1 year. So this is the only post-war engine I now have that is not equipped with that. And let's see, what else is here? There's minimal scratches here, some little show of wear and tear on the roofs of both engines. Overall, just a fairly clean-looking, smooth-running locomotive. For an engine that is well over 70 years old, it runs like it just rolled out of the factory still. So we'll go ahead and get this one for a few loops here on the layout. Alright, next up is the 2035 Pennsylvania K4, not really a Pacific, it is a 264, produced from 1950 and 1951. This is probably the cheapest post-war engine I've bought so far. I purchased it from a train show in Kansas City for about $65. And by looking at it, you can clearly see why. You can see all the scratched up chip paint, rust on the side rods, kind of just a little really beat up looking locomotive. So it's got some battle scars from the little boy whoever played with this way back in the day. But she still runs like a Swiss watch. You do have to coax her a little bit just to wake her up, but once she gets going, she is, a great running engine, as always. And, it's just a nice little, simple little engine, great for running, short sets. And funny enough, the freight consist I have coupled up behind it, I have incidentally assembled the 1469 WS set from 51. Even though I do not have any of the boxes from that set, I've pretty much picked up the engine and the cars individually from different hobby shops, train shows, or antique malls over the years, and it was just funny that I actually managed to accidentally put together a quote-unquote complete set. So, without further ado, let's get her running. Alright, next up is the 624 Chesapeake and Ohio NW2, produced between 1952 and 1954. Just like the 2035, I picked this up at the exact same train show as that engine. Paid, I think, about $125 at that Kansas City train show. So it's like the 2035, you gotta coax it a little bit to wake up. Even with a clean motor and clean brushes and everything, she struggles just a little bit to get going. But once she wakes up, she runs great. And as you can see, the engine is in pretty good shape. Little dust here and there, some little dings in the paint on the cab here and along the running board, and maybe a little bit on the trucks. But this engine is in pretty much excellent condition, despite, like I said, you gotta coax it a little bit to get her going. But she is pretty much one of the smoothest running engines I do have out of these post-war engines. She's really quiet too, really strong puller, can pretty much pull anything I put behind it. And just an overall good piece. So let's get her going. Up next is the 681 Pennsylvania turbine from 1950 to 1953. This includes a Lionel Lines tender compared to the usual Pennsylvania letter tenders that normally would come with this engine. I picked this up at the same Kansas City show, not exactly that same date, that I got the 2035 and the 624 from for about $110, and for its condition, that was a pretty fair price. This engine runs really well. You know, you don't have to coax it to get her going. The tender and the whistle is a bit finicky. Sometimes it just does not want to respond. But the overall, everybody knows how well these turbines are. They're just practically indestructible, strong pullers. You know, it's got, dents in the paint on the pilot. Not much on the tender. There's a little bit of scratches along the cab window and on the turbine engine itself. Just overall great running engine. Also the headlight, it likes to flicker every now and then. Sometimes it just doesn't want to make up its mind whether it wants to stay on or not. And if you notice, between the 2035 and the 681, I do not like to run with smoke. I know that is sacrilege among post-war users, but I never have really liked smoke for some reason. To me, it just fills up a room too much, and considering how much of a small apartment I really live in, I really don't want that to asphyxiate the entire apartment. Even though it is odorless, I just don't want, a big cloud of smoke inside here. So, that's pretty much it with the turbine. So here we go. Let's get her going. Now we have the 2338 Milwaukee Road GP7, first produced in 1955. This engine I picked up in 2020 when we were allowed to go outside again during the midst of the pandemic. And I picked this up from my dealer because right when we were allowed to go back out, I went straight to him because I wanted to get this engine before we were forced to go back inside. From my dealer, paid about $125, which to me is fair, as this engine is the more common variation with the all-black cab with the black stripe going across. The rare, more valuable version features the orange stripe going across the middle of the cab. So these engines are fairly common, at least this version is. A little more imperfections, scratches on the cab, along the hood, and basically that is about it. This engine was pretty much well taken care of by whoever last owned it. And, I'm happy to have a post-war Jeep in my collection. I do have like 3 other Jeeps, but they are from the MPC era, which those will be presented in the next video whenever I come to that. So yeah, again, great running engine. Great product of the post-war era. So here we go. Here we go again. Oh boy, now we have arrived at the big gun, the 2321 Delaware, Lackawanna, and Western Trainmaster that was originally produced in 1954. Now you're probably looking at this engine going, wait, that paint, it looks a little too dark and a little too new to be the post-war 2321. Well, that's because it isn't. This is a Williams by Bachmann reproduction that I got for Christmas in 2009. Now you're probably also thinking, wait, I thought you said this was a post-war video. Why are you showing a reproduction? Well, for one thing, there's no way I can really get my hands on a 2321 unless I feel like shelling out a bunch of money, which I do not have at the moment. And two, I'm really more focused on running trains. And for me, if this engine looks like a post-war and runs like a post-war, even though it's a newer model, to me, it counts. So I'm happy to have this engine, regardless if it's a reproduction or not. You know, with this being a Williams by Bachmann reproduction, you know, it has all the tooling from the original Trainmaster, more durable chassis, darker paint job. It has the True Blast 2-horn sequence equipped in this engine, but with it being on the ZW and that being finicky with anything not post-war running with it, so you won't be able to hear that. This is probably the smoothest running locomotive I have. Post-war, MPC, modern era, you know, MTH, Lionel, Williams, whichever. This is just such a wonderful piece. And if you can find any Williams engines around still these days, I highly recommend getting them. They are just really, really fantastic runners. And they have the looks and the feel of the original post-war, and they really do kind of help with the wallet if you're looking to have something that looks like a post-war engine, but you can't necessarily afford it. So, here we go. Continuing the trend from the last locomotive, we come to the 58 Great Northern Rotary Snowplow motorized unit. Again, this is a reproduction that comes from the post-war celebration series of the late 90s, early 2000s. This little guy has one big advantage over its original counterpart, is that it has a traction tire underneath the last driver. So this allows me to actually run a pretty good sized consist behind this little engine, whereas most post-war motorized units like these engines could maybe pull 1 or 2 cars maximum, since they completely lacked magnet traction and they were, you know, I think fairly light for their construction. So this engine is a lot more durable and a lot more powerful than the original. And as you can see, we'll demonstrate here, it can pull, you know, fairly good sized cars. I do have a short consist for it, but I have had tested it before with at least up to 20 cars. So it's for a little guy, it is a pretty strong puller. So we shall see what she can do now. Turning back to the all original post-war engines, we come to the 629 Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy 44 tonner, first produced and only produced in 1956. And this engine, and if you made it this far in the video, the Marks engine on above are technically my first O-gauge locomotives. Both of these were given to me by my grandpa on my mother's side, I think roughly when I was like 7 or 8 years old. They came home, but they still sat in a box for a few years, till about 2003 when I got the I Love Toy Train set and was able to get tubular track for Christmas and a transformer, and so I was able to run them in my bedroom. The Marks engine is a 666 242. Forgive me, I am not very knowledgeable on Marks equipment. I'm more loyal to Lionel from this period. But the Marks engine currently does not run. I've never have really ran it since I've had it. It's pretty much been relegated to a display piece. But I am planning to eventually take it to my dealer, probably after Christmas, to see what can be done to either get a complete new motor for it or just put a new frame or whatever needs to be done. So hopefully I can get this running again. But yeah, these engines were given to me by my grandpa, and the 629, going back to that, this is, I've read, a very hard to find locomotive, especially if it's in really good shape. As you can tell by this engine, there's got scratches all over it, all along the cab, frame, the hood, all that, so finding one in absolute pristine condition is pretty collectible from what I hear. But I am happy to have this engine, even though I rarely run it. I'm never been a huge fan of the 44 tonners, to be honest. I think they're my least favorite of the diesels from the post-war period. They just look awkward, and the paint they put on all the models is just kind of just bland and generic, and just really shows that Lionel after as the 50s went on and into the 60s, they started cheapening, making things just look not as detailed as before, and just not up to the quality that was pre-55. But, again, this is a nice piece to have. I like to bring it out every once in a while just to make sure it still runs. And so we'll just give her a whirl here. Next is the 2032 Erie Alcos AA. Again, these are, like the last two engines, these are from my grandpa. I first found these in one of his closets when I was 9 or 10 years old. And I asked if I could have them, and he said no, and then he was going to give them to some other family members. And for years, I wondered who got them, or I would think to myself, was I hallucinating? Did I just have like a fever dream when I was 10 years old? Did I really see these up there? And one day in early 2020, right before COVID, I get a text from one of my uncles. He sends me a picture. He found them in his basement, and I was ecstatic. I thought these engines were lost to time forever. I thought I would never have them, and he sent them to me straight away. There was also a few freight cars, including a stock car and I think another Mark's flat car. I'm not exactly sure what else is in there. He still has yet to send those to me. Hopefully he does. I'll have to get in contact with him. But anyways, onto the engines now. Right now what you see in the lead, like the New York Central, is the dummy unit. The powered unit only runs in reverse. The E unit will need to be replaced eventually, but for right now, I'm just happy it runs. Because when I first put it on the track, it rolled. I think these things hadn't run in a good 50, 60 years. And when it came on the tracks, it just rolled to life like nothing happened. You know, it was like it was still fresh out of the factory. But yeah, you can tell by the shell, again, like everything, you know, little rust, you know, little some dust and wear on the top of the shells. You know, dings in the paint. You know, again, these were toy trains, not scale models. So hopefully it comes to everybody who's actually listened to me ramble for the last 20 or so minutes. But yeah, you know, again, I'm just happy to have these in my collection at long last. And hopefully I can get a couple more Alcos, whether they're the UP from the anniversary set or some of the more cheaper ones from the late 50s and early 60s. And so we'll just give this thing a whirl. And finally, last but not least, what I call the crown jewel of my collection, the 2353 Santa Fe F3 ABA set. Now, I mentioned earlier with the 2032 that I found them when I was around 9, 10 years old. Well, at the exact same time, these F units were in that same box. And when I asked my grandpa for these engines, he said I could only have the Santa Fe. And even though I was disappointed I could not get the Eries, I was more than ecstatic to have this, pretty much the Cadillac of toy trains. Even though that title belongs to the Trainmaster, I don't care. That goes to the Santa Fe in my opinion. But yeah, this is probably, you know, the most run post-war engine I have. It is my absolute favorite of my fleet. I just treasure this more than anything I have in O-Gauge. I am just so happy to have that I was able to get these engines at such a young age and just to be able to run them like mad. You know, so much so that I actually had to replace the front motor here in the powered unit last November because all the gears had worn down to basically nothing. That just shows that as a little kid, I knew nothing about, you know, properly maintaining these engines. I just wanted to run the heck out of them. But, you know, now that, you know, the rear motor is still in really good shape. You know, all the teeth are still intact on all the gears. You know, she's got a, you know, front brand new motor, you know, that my dealer was able to install. And now she runs like butter once again. You know, she's got, you know, like the New York Central, she's got the 2 horizontal motors, so she is a loud growler, much louder than the New York Central. So I'm glad you stuck around at least to this point to watch the video. Hopefully we can do this again sometime, maybe soon, with all my MPC locomotives and some of my I guess you could say, modern era locomotives that I have in my Lionel O-gauge fleet. And maybe one day I'll go over each individual piece of the I Love Toy train set. Who knows? We'll see. So we'll do a few minutes of the 2353 and we'll wrap this video up. Thank you all again. Hope to see you next time.